Hello, and welcome back to the IslesNation Podcast. Today we're going to be focusing on prospects with our prospects expert, ITM. I'm Pete Truskowski. I'm joined by ITM as well as Carey Haber. How are you guys doing today?
Good, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Good. It is basically finally October, so that is cool.
Not yet. My dad's birthday's in 2 hours, so I would know. But anyway,
Well, happy early birthday.
mine's on Friday. My dad's is tomorrow, Thursday. He claims I'm the worst birthday present he ever got.
Well, that's a lovely start.
So, a lot going on. Well, not a lot going on in the world of the prospects this far, actually. A lot of the junior seasons are just getting underway, as well as the foreign leagues. But I think a good place to start would be with the Islanders, and in their training camp, the Islanders sent Michael Del Cole and Anthony Beauvillier back to juniors yesterday, but decided to keep Matt Barzal around. So basically, ITM, will start with you. Are you surprised that it appears Barzal has made more of an impact at this point than Del Cole?
No, I can't say I'm surprised. I mean, I would say before camp started, I think those two were probably 1 and 2 on most people's lists as far as top prospects in the organization. So one having a little better showing than the other is not terribly surprising.
Carey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm not overly surprised. I think, one of the things with 18, 19-year-olds is that skating and raw skill, when they're combined together, really stand out more, and that's not the game that Michael Del Cole plays at this point. His skating just, frankly, isn't where it needs to be if he wants to play at the NHL level. But that also shouldn't be an indictment on him either. He's 19 years old, and he's also a wing, and frankly, that position, you don't need to be necessarily as great of a skater as you do to be a center or defenseman to succeed in this league either. So I'm not surprised that Barzal has made more of an impression, but at the same time, I don't think, I saw some alarms about Del Cole, and I don't think that's necessarily fair either. I think the Isles have done a good job at rewarding a player that should be rewarded, and they've done a good job with a player that appears to need more development time in terms of his skating ability.
To add to that, there's been some people that have speculated that Barzal might start the season on Long Island with Steve Bernier's injury. ITM, do you think that would be a bad move? And how overmatched do you think Barzal would be if he got a few games in before being sent back to juniors?
I mean, if he's staying up for Bernier, what's he going to be doing? Sitting in the press box? It's not like Bernier is a top 6 or a top 9 forward on this team right now as it currently sits. Is there value in that? I mean, they've done it before. I wouldn't know. I've never sat in the press box as a roster player, so I really don't know how much you get from that and with practicing as opposed to an extra 2 weeks in juniors where he's going to be for the rest of the year anyway. So I guess it would be a nice thing for him to do, an accomplishment. He'd be getting paid and practicing with NHL players. As far as his development in the grand scheme of things, no, I don't think it's going to swing it one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Islanders are in a really good position when it comes to their forward depth. They have one of the best top to bottom forward corpses in the league, and in terms of Barzal, I think that certainly I think there's credence to the fact that they want to reward a kid that deserves to be rewarded, and I think that's understandable and fair. At the same time, to ITM's point, should he really be sitting in the press box as opposed to playing in games in Seattle? I see both sides to that. Like he said, they've done it before, and the players that they've done it with, guys like Ryan Strome, certainly it didn't hurt them. So I don't think there's much of a downside, but ultimately the fact that he's it seems to be destined to be sent back to Seattle at some point. I'm not sure necessarily what the rush is to keep him up if he's not actually going to be playing in games and helping this team on the ice at this point.
All right, we'll move on to Joshua Hosang, who got his junior season underway this past weekend, I believe. ITM, you watched his games. What do you have to say about the overall impression he made?
I mean, it's pretty much the same Josh Hosang that we've seen over the last couple of years. Dynamic player, very fast. We know why his junior season begun already, and as far as going down to Niagara when he did and getting a preseason OHL game in and playing this past weekend as opposed to playing in preseason games at the Barclays Center. He looked good. It was two drastically different games for Niagara. One was an 8-1 laugher over a terrible Sudbury team, and the second night he wasn't able to do quite as much against Sault Ste. Marie, which is a tough team, and they didn't get in with much room to skate. They really held him in check. I have the footage for that, so we could kind of roll that while we talk about it.
So the first thing that I think is good to see is that in his first regular season game back, he was obviously very productive. I know that was one of the narratives when his, I guess, ejection from Islanders camp occurred. Was how is he going to take it, given that he seems to be somewhat of a loose cannon from that sense. But the fact that he went and in the first game performed very well, that obviously is a good sign. We can see in the clips that his skating ability is very much intact and well above what you would typically see, at the OHL level. So, certainly I think there's good signs here. It doesn't seem as though this is necessarily negatively affect him, at least in the short term.
Yeah, you could tell he's really flying out there. He's 26 in black.
He's 26 in black, and this is against Sudbury right here. Obviously, you could see they were on the defense the entire time. They gave Niagara a lot of room to skate, but you give Hosang and a couple of the other players that he plays with, DeFruscia, this was an 8-1 game, and you could see why.
Yeah, so I know these are just clips, but it doesn't look like Sudbury is controlling much of the play here at all.
Yeah, these are a power play. They were chasing the whole night. They weren't very successful in slowing down the transition game of Hosang or Niagara. They were able to control and get across the blue line with relative ease. And you do that to a player like Hosang, and he'll kill you.
Let me ask you a question, because one of the things that I like, in terms of Islanders prospects is when their junior teams are successful. Obviously having experience in junior playoffs and then hopefully Memorial Cup action. To me, that's somewhat important. Something that for these players, I think it's a good stepping stone into playing meaningful games, and similar to why we would all want Bridgeport to be successful. So can you give us a sense of what Niagara's expectations are this year?
Well, I think a lot of it honestly rides on Hosang's line. I mean, he's playing with two guys that have been there forever. They've been there playing for 2 seasons with Carter Verhaeghe, who's now in the system as a Sound Tiger. They've been there. They played with Ryan Strome. When they were coming up, that was his last season. He plays on a line with Jordan Maletta and Anthony DeFruscia. So that line is really going to get used a ton. They're a senior team, and that team's going to go about as far as they take them, at least as they are currently constituted right now.
Would you consider Hosang Niagara's top player right now?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I would consider Hosang one of the top players in the OHL right now, if not the best.
So overall, in the whole CHL, the Canadian Hockey League junior system, would it be fair to say that the Islanders have three of the best forward prospects in Delcol, Barzal, and Hosang?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that could even be debated at this point. Those are three incredibly gifted offensive skill players that put up tremendous amount of offense. And really, they're not line drivers; they're team drivers. They as they go, the team goes.
I mean, we're watching these clips, and the thing that keeps sticking out about Hosang, and obviously he's a very skilled player in terms of his puck skills and his raw ability, but I mean, we mentioned it before, but his skating is just so far above and beyond what anyone else on that ice is, and I kind of want to tie that into his potential in the NHL. In terms of his skating ability. Would it be considered above average already as compared to a typical NHL winger?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, he's elite, maybe even a class by his own where he is right now. As far as the NHL, there's no reason to believe he wouldn't be an exciting player in the high end right now. Unfortunately, that's not everything though. You know, in juniors when he's got a little more time, he could slow down and he still even makes errors. I mean, I've mentioned it to you, off the podcast. He goes so fast through traffic, and he's got the great stick handling, and then he gets himself into a little bit of trouble, and he kind of throws it in a direction where he thinks there's help, and there's either nobody or in that position, and they run the other way. So he does have to calm down a little bit. That won't work in the NHL. Um, that will take time.
Mm-hmm.
I think a question for you, for someone that doesn't follow junior hockey and they see the point totals, what would you consider a good point total? Because you see prospects that put up 80 points and they're considered elite, and then you see former fifth rounders in their overage year put up 80 points. So basically, how do you differentiate between that and what makes a point total more impressive to you? And what would you consider an elite point total in juniors?
I mean, that fluctuates by league. It fluctuates from year to year. It also drastically changes by your age, by the team you're on, by the offense. I don't really put a ton of stock into point totals. I don't get hung up on, oh, he didn't hit 80 points this season. That's a disappointment. I kind of just look how they play, when they're in the lineup, when they're not. Overseas, a lot of these higher end guys are playing in tournaments, and their game played totals are down, so the point totals are going to be down. So, I mean, I guess it sounds like I'm ducking your question. I'm really not. I'm just not a guy who's a big believer in numbers as far as you have to hit them or you're in danger of being a bust.
Well, speaking of numbers, and one of the positions in hockey that typically goes well beyond that is defenseman. And I know that you have some footage on one of the draft picks from 2015 in Parker Weatherspoon, who was, I believe, actually the first or second cut from the main camp this year. I wanted to kind of, get a sense from you on kind of where he is. He was a mid-round pick, but I thought I remember reading that he actually went a little bit lower than originally expected. So, what's kind of your take on, as we start playing the clips, what's kind of your take on where his game is at right now?
I personally love this pick, and it's funny. The clips kind of start out here with one of his poor plays. He got a shot blocked, and coming back, he ended up getting scored on. But you'll see in the clips here just how good of a skater he is, how calm he is. This Tri-City team really relies on him as being the puck mover out of the zone, coming up the ice, outlet passes. Right here, he's working the power play. excellent at keeping the puck in, getting the puck to the net. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He's a bit undersized at 170, but if you watch these clips, I mean, he was physically threw the body around effectively. Didn't take himself out of any plays. Took people out of plays. He can do everything, and I think he has a very, I don't want to say a very high upside, but I mean he's sleeper potential for someone drafted where he was. The Islanders, in my opinion, got to steal. I'm a big Parker Wotherspoon fan. I've liked watching him play. I like watching his brother play. His brother's a fantastic player. He's just, he does remind me, and this is not my player comp. I've seen it somewhere, and I can't remember who. So, he does have a lot of Calvin DeHaan in him. He's very calm, can handle the puck, can skate, cerebral, just kind of does everything. Really, really good defenseman.
It's interesting because one of the things that we have spoken about quite a bit is the ability for defensemen in the quote new age NHL to have both skating mobility and puck skills, and that's part of the reason why I think the Islanders gave up, so to speak, on Griffin Reinhart, and taking a look at the guys that they drafted this year, especially when you talk about the defensemen, including Wotherspoon and Mitch Van de Sample, who I know has played both positions. But it seems like they've been placing an emphasis now, based off of learnings that they've made over the last few years, that these are the types of players that they want to move forward with. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think it's accurate. I think it's smart too. I mean, watching the NHL, particularly if you're a defenseman, if you lack that foot speed, I mean, we saw Reinhart struggle as he goes up through the ranks. It's very, very difficult to make that next jump and join quickly. It's not to say that you can't be a strong NHL player if you don't skate incredibly well, but it is that much more difficult, and got to rely very, very heavily on your positioning and such. But yeah, I think that's an accurate thing to say, and I think that's a good direction to go. And,
no, totally. And similar to what we spoke about with Hosan, do you have a sense of what Tri-City's expectations are this year in the WHL?
I don't. I can tell you, watching this game right here, very exciting game against Spokane. Spokane really did drive a lot of the play and outshot Tri-Cities and took it to them. But it was an evenly matched game. It was. I would expect both of these teams that we're watching here to make the playoffs and get to at least the postseason.
Is Wotherspoon one of the top defensemen for Tri-City, and who's he been paired with? Anyone that we'd know of?
I don't know if you've heard of him. He was paired a lot, at least in the first game with Coughlin. He was on the top pairing. He was on the number one power play unit, was Wotherspoon. He did get time on the penalty kill when he wasn't in the box because he did take 3 penalties in this game. I think he was a little amped up, took some over-aggressive penalties, but they rely on him heavily. I would say, based on his usage in the first game, they rely on him more than any other defenseman.
How far away would you think Wotherspoon would be from potentially making an impact on Long Island? Is he a long ways away? Is he more of a project?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I define him as a project. He's just a guy with his build, being so light, and not being just a finesse player, somebody who actually does use his body to, defend. I think it'll take a while, and I think he has a while. I don't think there's any rush or urgency to bring someone like him along and try and get him along. But I could see him doing, the Calvin DeHaan route and playing his 2 years in juniors and going to Bridgeport for a few years and and then coming up when he's good and ready.
Would you say that, though, one of the things that you said that I think stuck out is how much responsibility that he's being given as, an 18-year-old. Now, obviously, it's team by team, I think, in that sense. But would you say that having this much responsibility as an 18-year-old is a positive sign, or is it more of a commonplace thing for drafted players?
I mean, yeah, it is fairly common. If you're good enough to get drafted in the NHL, odds are your team relies on you pretty heavily. But that being said, I mean, I don't know because I wasn't watching this game as a stopwatch. For someone who took 3 penalties, he was on the ice an awful lot, and Spokane didn't really do much when he was out there. So that said, I do think it's a good thing that he's going to be getting this much ice time and getting power play and penalty kill, special team time this early as an 18-year-old. He was a young draftee. If he was born a couple of weeks later, this year's draft. So he is a very young player. Logging this much ice time. It's just a tribute to the type of player that he is. And I guess I'm sure they'll adjust to that if he wavers a little bit here and there. I'm sure they'll ramp down his role, but that's all I want to do. It's just part of the process.
Yeah. So let's you have one more prospect to touch on, and I know it's one of your favorites. Ilya Sorokin, goalie who is currently playing in the KHL. I think you've mentioned before that he's third string right now, but he has gotten into 2 games now. So do you want to talk a little bit about him, where he is, and the implications of him signing through, I think it was 2018, over in Russia?
Sure. Yeah, actually, he's newly one of my favorites. When he was drafted, I had only seen him play 1 game, and I wasn't really watching him. I was watching I believe it was Petrov at the time. He didn't really stand out to me, so I wasn't really thrilled with the pick. But I watched him quite a bit last year, and he has a very good deal of talent. He's got his shortcomings as well. But in the first couple of games that I saw, he handled the puck a lot better than he did last season. And he did seem to be a little bit more in control. That's him right there, number 90 in red. He didn't have to work too hard in this one. Ugra, the team that he went up against here, not an offensively explosive team. But he made the saves he had to make. He looked under control. He did show that excellent lateral movement that he has. He seemed much more under control than I did see him last year. Maybe that comes from playing with a better team. He got traded late in the season last year to CSKA Moscow. So I think his ceiling is very high. He did get extended, as you said earlier this week, for another season. So it's going to be at least 3 more years in the KHL for him. But that'll put him at 22, 23 years old when that's over. So that's not the end of the world.
No, it's not, especially for goaltenders. Can you give us a sense of where he ranks in the Islander system? There's obviously, been some recent draft picks, recent trades where they've kind of restocked their entire pool here in terms of their goaltenders. So, even knowing that he would be far away from making an impact in the NHL, where do you see his raw talent as compared to some of these other guys like Stefan Williams and Chris Gibson and Linus Soderstrom, etc.?
Well, I mean, I have to be fair to all of those guys. Soderstrom's in Sweden. I don't get to see very many of those games. In fact, I think the only time I saw him play was in the World Juniors. Stephon Williams, I've seen play a little bit in college and in Bridgeport. I like him. Excuse me, sorry, I'm battling a cold. I like him, but I don't think there is anybody that has the raw talent that Sorokin does. Now, what does that mean? I don't know, but I have him clearly as the number one goaltender in the prospect as far as prospects go in the system. I don't think anyone's close, but we'll get a good look at Stephon Williams this year. Maybe he could challenge.
Yeah. One of the things that really stands out about him is he's got good height. I mean, you can tell that he seems to play big in there, and he's, especially compared to some of the smaller goals that the Islanders have had recently, like Block and getting to Barkov, he stands above in terms of what his stature looks like. And that seems to be more of a common thing amongst newly drafted goaltenders at this point, where they're drafting them taller.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a little bit of trouble. There was some feedback there.
That's okay. His height, compared to what the Islanders have had recently, it seems like that's more of a common tactic now, where NHL teams are drafting basically bigger goaltenders than they used to.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's part of everything. I feel like all the players are getting bigger, so the goaltenders are going to get bigger with them. As far as Sorokin, I don't think he's an extremely tall goaltender, but his height does allow him to cover the low ice, and he does stay down. He doesn't get beat very often down. He understands, depth pretty well at this point, so he takes away the low ice first. He stands upright. He can take enough move the net away up top. And then his athleticism, he just lets his athleticism take over.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing to touch on would be the KHL is normally considered a low-scoring league, and we've seen former Islander prospects like Mikko Koskinen and Anders Nielsen go to the KHL and put up insane numbers. I think Nielsen had like a .940 save percentage last year. So how hard would you think it is to judge a goalie in the KHL based on that?
Well, not only do I think it's hard to judge a goaltender based on numbers, I think it's hard to judge really any offensive player, any player in the league based on the numbers, and that includes Kirill Petrov. And my article kind of touched on that a little bit. It's very hard to say, oh, so and so had X amount of points, so that's going to translate to this in the NHL. It's really how the player adjusts to not only the rink and the team and the style of play, but also the language and society and all those sorts of things. So just as an example, Sorokin played against Jokerit earlier this week. Jokerit was one of the best teams in the league at the time, 9-2. They were in first place. Sorokin got the win, a 5-2 victory. And one of the leading scorers on Jokerit is Peter Regan, and he gets a ridiculous amount of power play time, and he's a scorer over in the KHL. So it's very, very difficult to say, hey, if you're a point per game player over in the KHL, you're gonna be a 60-point guy in the NHL, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's actually very similar to an anecdote I heard recently where they were talking about Kevin Dahlman, who used to play in the NHL, and he went over to Russia, and he's basically a star in the KHL.
Yeah.
And they were basically saying like he probably would not even want to come back and play and be a tweener, be a depth guy, be in the AHL. He's got such a good gig over there. And I think to your point, examples like that, and also the fact that we also don't have a lot of exposure to the league in general. I think right, it just makes it tough to judge.
Yeah, it is. And another player on Jokic is Jesse Uenson. And, he's got a pretty significant role over there, and I'm sure he'll be just happy playing over there. It's a very hard thing to do to just take results over there and say, oh, well, that'll translate. It just doesn't work that way.
That's why we have you, right?
Yeah, sure.
Give yourself some credit. I'd like to thank ITM for teaching me about 500 times more than I know about any of these prospects in the last half hour. So I'm sure everyone that's listening will learn a lot because I doubt you knew anything about Parker Weatherspoon before right now. So don't say we never did anything for you at Isles Nation.
If he says keep an eye on him, then everyone should keep an eye on him.
All right, that'll do it for us here today. I'd like to thank Carey and ITM for joining me. Remember to check us out on the web at IslesNation.net, on Twitter, NYIslesNation, Facebook, NYIslesNation, and Instagram, NYIslesNation. We're going to continue to ramp up for the season, which is just almost 8 days away at this point. So, thanks, guys. Any final words?
No, just thank you for having me. And these videos that were on the podcast, I think Carey said he'd be putting them up on the website. We'll upload them so everybody can, take a look at them for themselves and see what they say. And I'll be doing that every week. Just posting up the videos, hopefully doing these podcasts if you'll have me. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Pete. And we'll talk to everyone soon.
Later. Let's go Islanders.